Alright, this is the engine going into the 70 Dodge truck. The backstory on this is my mom owned the Ram Charger. The poor 2-barrel 318 in it was worn slap out. So I picked this up from my uncle, and this come out of an 85 car. So you see it has the bosses in there for the roller cam, and actually had the roller cam in it. So it's got the dog bones for that. Still got the roller lifters and the spider for that. All the dog bones, push rods, all that good stuff, right? So this is kind of the in-between. It's not a Magnum engine, but it is the roller cam, and they started about 85-ish on the 318's roller cam on this. So this would have the 302 casted head, or I think there's the other one that's the same thing. It might be later model, but it's what they call the swirl port head. Was what would come on here. This one doesn't have the heads because I used them on another 2-barrel 318 that I picked up out of a like 84 wreck truck, and that actually went into my 90 model Dodge truck. I'll put some pictures of it up, and well, let's just listen to the little sound clip of what I ended up doing on that one. So this is a 318. It was born at night. It was not born last night because it says 1985 on it, and I've had it since before last night. This is whenever I rebuilt this engine, I just went with the stock replacement pistons in here. So as you can see, nothing. There's no pop-ups, no nothing. You can see that that's pretty much top dead center right there. It sits down, like 80 thousandths in the hole there. So no concept of quench whatsoever. This is, like I said, just a stock rebuild. I didn't do anything fancy to it, like balancing and this and that and decking and none of that. Some of that's going to be addressed because we are trying to make a little bit more performance engine. So, and the thing is, when I built this, I didn't have a whole lot of money, and I just got out of the military. I was going back to college, and poor college student. So I built it on a budget. So anyways, this is the engine we're going with. We're going to go through and do some stuff on here. I need to tear everything down. It's set for a long time. You see it just has crud in it. It wasn't a bad engine. The reason we took it out of the Ram Charger is because we had transmission issues. We went through 2 different transmissions, old junky transmissions, not like, perfectly brand new transmissions, and a stock 318 broke it. Went through 2 of them. The first one was the original transmission that the starter bolt got loose, and then it knocked a couple teeth off the ring gear on the torque converter. So it's like, well, by the time you get to the torque converter on that, you just put a different transmission in. So we actually put the transmission from the brown 73 Dodge truck that we had pulled out, that 727, bolted it in there, and that lasted till 3rd gear went out, just old junky stuff. Ironically, the transmission that was behind this engine and the original 318 and the Ram Charger is now back in the Ram Charger with a 360 in front of it. That's how these projects go, right? So anyways, that's the story on this engine, and like I said, I just did the basic rebuild on it, and we're just going to be tearing it down because it's just set and it's got dirt and crud and everything in there. Going to clean everything out real good. Check our lifter bores and everything. It's not going to need board or anything. It's already got a good clean setup on it. It might have 20,000 miles, maybe 30,000 miles on the engine, so not much at all. But what I want to do is check the crankshaft, make sure everything is good and didn't get any crud or anything in there, and just clean everything out real good. I probably will go through and get this block decked, which means it needs to go through and get vatted, which is new cam bearings and freeze plugs, which isn't a bad thing. I want to go in there and do a couple things that I've learned over the years to help clean these blocks up. The other thing, all this flash over here that can cause a crack in there, I want to grind all that out and make sure all of our return oil galleys in there are nice and clean. So I'm going to show all of that. So there's a lot to do on the short block before we get to what cam is going to go in it, what heads, what intake, so on and so on. have the positive music. There. So what we're going to do, we're going to pull our thrust bearing, which is this one right here on a Mopar. Usually they're somewhere right in the middle. Now, one of the reasons you want to pull a thrust bearing is because the crankshaft goes forward and back, particularly with your manual transmissions. You put those really stiff clutches in there, it's going to make that crankshaft run back and forth. So you really got to check that right there, and you might want to look at doing something different as far as a stiff clutch, like going to a dual clutch or something like that. But yeah, a single clutch will really tear that up, or can. Let's go ahead and get that popped off. Get my oil pump out of the way. You see what I do? I just have the bolt kind of in there, not really on the threads, not in the block, and just kind of tap her up. And that's all you got to do. Sometimes they're in there pretty good. Okay, looks ugly because we got oil on it, but I see a little bit of thrust wear right there. But that just looks like a wear pattern. This engine has probably 20, maybe 30,000 miles on it right there. One of the things, your crankshaft will be marked somewhere if it's turned down. They don't always do that, unfortunately. Yeah, and here's your thrust right there. So we don't have anything weird going on with our thrust. Right? But your bearings will always be marked on the back. And I'll be replacing these bearings, and we're going to check out the crankshaft too, make sure that it doesn't need anything while we're in here, right? So again, the only reason I'm tearing it down is because it's set for a while. Let me pop out a bearing, I'll show you the back of it and what it looks like so you can tell what your bearings are. Rods and mains will be done the same way. Okay. You can see right there is a 10 and a part number on it. So I used a Clevite bearing, Mahle, Clevite, whatever. Bearing in there, just a standard bearing on this. You check the rods the same way, then you know what your crankshaft is and all that. Because I have had a time to where the crankshaft was not marked, but it was turned 10-10. So I got a fresh set of bearings not turned down over there. Okay, got the caps off and set up. This is my #1 cap, and since the oil pump's at the back of the engine on #5 on a small block Mopar, the last bearing to get oiling is the one all the way up front. And it's the opposite of that on your small Ford because your oil pump's up front, so you want to check the back bearing. And we don't see any copper. There's a little bit of wear in there, probably from starting up. It could have been from initial startup and break in, or just you turn the engine off overnight or a couple days and then you start it back up and all the oil seeps out, right? Because the whole gravity thing. So let's look at our bearing. We'll look at the screen. So we look good and clean. I wiped it out. We got a little bit of chatter side to side, but that's a really clean looking rod bearing right there. I would reuse that if I was in a pinch, but rod bearings are cheap. This rod looks good and clean. The piston looks fairly good. Rings aren't stuck. There is a little bit of scratching on the piston wall, so I'll probably buff that out. I would reuse these rings if I had to. I'm not going to because rings are cheap. All right, so we probably, if you're watching my channel, you may have watched DavidVizard, especially if you're doing 318 stuff. Probably watched DavidVizard and their Mission Impossible build, and David spent a whole lot of time on this rod here polishing it up to gain, I mean, I guessed around maybe 5 to 10 horsepower, and I think that's about what he said you would gain just by weight and everything. Okay, well, there's a bunch of time involved in doing that. The way I look at it, time is not free. Your time isn't free because you could go be doing something else. If you could grind on a rod, you could go get you a side job and spend your time and make some sort of money. You know, there's something you could do in that time. So it's an opportunity cost to grind the rod for not a whole lot of gain. The other thing is once you do all that, if you just really felt inclined to do it, you still got to balance the engine. Where I'm at, that ain't free either, so there's still a monetary cost and there was a time cost. I think the better option would be to get rid of this stupid piston that is just an atrocity to anything performance related. It don't sit flush, it sits down in the hole. I mean, yeah, get a good piston and it'll overcome anything you're going to do with a rod and balancing, right? Okay, that's my 2 cents there, just to let you know. Oh, my knee. I did some of that carpenter work. My knees do not like carpenter work. So one of the things to note, so if we look at a rod, I pulled it out, and we see on there, I can't tell what the screen's doing. Hopefully we're focused because I got a glove on and it won't do its thing. All right. See how there's marks there? Line those up, put your rod nuts back on the bolts and leave that as an assembly. And of course we got our piston mark right there where it came out, right? Because we're going to be reusing all this stuff and we don't want to get things mixed up. As the last thing you want to do is get your rod caps mixed between rods and all that stuff. The holes don't matter. I mean, you can put the pistons wherever as long as that arrow is facing forward. That's all you got to do there. Make sure your rods are right. Yeah, you can't be flipping that stuff around. Okay, I'm going to continue tearing this down. We see what we got. It's pretty clean, so no big deal there. Then I'll have to do some assembly. Now I'm over in the corner here because pulled the truck in, so I'm going to be a little bit tight working for a little while. I need to get rid of that slant 6 over there. But that's just how it is. Make sure that whenever you're doing stuff like this, you can walk all the way around all your projects. Like what we see here, I got a path to get to the toolbox, and I'm not tripping over anything, which those boards may have to change if that starts becoming a trip hazard right there. Oh, that's, you're just going to have to keep watching. People who know me know what I'm doing with that. So leave it in a comment if you think you know what I'm doing with that. Okay, got something interesting after pausing the music. Check that out. Make sure you can see it. See a little bit of copper right on the edge. Kill some light. Probably too much light. See how it's just on the edge? And here's our cap and a text message. Right? And that would match up. So that would come around. I looked at it and still put it on wrong, I think. Hold on. Technical difficulties. There we go. Line my hoo-yahs up. So we see that around there. And we see on the opposing side, yep, that's right. Opposing side just a little bit. So what would cause that? So when you're putting the piston, about to drop it everywhere. Put these on first before I chunk my rod cap across the floor. Drop the piston and bust it, and then I really have to buy some new pistons. All right, so whenever your piston, you're putting it down into your cylinder, it's free to rotate, right? So even if as it comes onto the crankshaft, of course the cap's not on there, even when it comes onto the crankshaft, you got a little bit of wobble that you can get in there. And I usually check for that. This is the only one that looks like that. So 7 out of 8 ain't bad, right? So did it hurt anything? Probably not. It's just right on the edges there. It's not wiped all the way across. But that's something to remember when you're building your engine. You get the piston in and you're super excited and you maybe had a couple tasty beverages or something. Remember to make sure that you square them back up. All right. This rod here, we had a little bit of polishing action in there and we got a little dark spot. I'm not sure what's going on there. That might just have been a little water spot because the engine did set. Now here's the real reason I wanted to tear this apart. See all that gunky, yucky, nasty stuff in there? If I would have ran that engine, that would have been up into the cylinder walls. Yeah, then we would have had a problem. Okay, let's talk about where we're going with this engine right here. 318, you see it's bored 30 over with a stock replacement piston in there. Original 2-barrel engine. So I was going to build this quite a while back. I've been planning on building this engine and putting it in this truck. I'm finally getting to it. And in the meanwhile, you probably watched a nice little 2-barrel 318 video series that come out. There's a collaboration between some professionals. Uncle Tony, DavidVizard, and Unity Motorsports, Andy Woods. So, and Ford, because there's Charles Servadio, cylinder head porting. I hope I said your name right. So anyways, they did the Mission Impossible thing. And I'm like, well, hey, that's kind of cool. Let's see if I can take what the professionals have done and apply what I feel comfortable doing. And that's what this build is turned out to be. This is a 2-barrel 318. I have 2-barrel heads. I have a 2-barrel manifold. I'm not putting a 2-barrel manifold on there. When we go over intake manifolds for this, I'll explain thoroughly why, but it's because I personally own 4-barrel manifolds. Why would I put a 2-barrel on it, right? I mean, I'm not doing this for the sake of YouTube, right? That's just silly. But anyways, I'm going to build this engine with the parts I have and see what we get. And, yes, I'm going to replace head gaskets and bolts and maybe oil pump, timing chain. I'm talking about the block, the pistons, the crank, the cam. I have the factory roller cam for this engine, the factory roller lifters. And I believe the original thing Uncle Tony said, and I'm not saying I'm trying to do the challenge or whatever. I'm trying to kind of somewhat see how close I can get with the things I have. Now, I may replace push rods. I may have to replace a lifter, something like that. Rocker arms I may replace, but they'll be all stock replacement parts that I can get from the parts store or Rock Auto, right? And that's where I'm going to be sourcing my parts, is between one of those two, unless so much cheaper on head gaskets or something. But we're going to come back and put this back together. I'm going to do some of the things they were talking about. I'm not going to polish rods out. That's just not worth my time. But I will port the heads out, because I do have the 302 casting heads, the swirl port heads. I have those, so I'm going to try to see what I can do with a quickie port and replicate that. I think that's something completely doable, and do some manifold modifications on there. Put it back together. We already talked about our pistons a little bit. About how there's the offset on the pistons that I have. They're factory replacement pistons, and see what we get. And my target, me personally, is still going to be 1 horsepower per cubic inch, but I don't have access to an engine dyno. I have access to a chassis dyno. So the intent is to put a 3-speed manual transmission behind this. So that will be, given its board, it's 323 cubic inches. That'll be right around 275 wheel horsepower. That's going to be my goal to hit with this 318. Am I going to do it with the stock cam? Nope. Not going to do it with a stock cam and stock manifolds. But I would like to see how close I can get to that with the stock cam and manifolds. And the intent is to go ahead and put long tube headers on there, a good tuned long tube header, and a small cam in it, like the 268 duration cam, like a 218 at 50. Multiple reasons for me doing that. Not just to hit a horsepower goal. I have other things I'm using this engine to test out on, and that'll be way down the road on the channel when I get to my Mustang, right? So all of this is going to be developmental work for my 89 Mustang 302 build that I want to do, because I kind of want to do the same thing and hit roughly the same target horsepower, but with an automatic. So it's going to have to build some more power right there. But that's going to be the build overview for this. That's very similar to what they're doing. That's what I was going to do originally anyway. But what I may do, because of what they had, like I said, I'm going to try to take what the professionals done, what I'm comfortable with. I'm going to go ahead and implement those and see what I can get on there. So the other thing that I think would be cool that I would change from my original build plan is I do have 2-barrel carburetors. So for the 2-barrel aspect, I get getting a 4-barrel can be a little hard, but 4-barrel intakes for these engines are plentiful. I mean, they're everywhere, right? You can get factory ones, you can get aftermarket, the eBay ones. I mean, they're everywhere. If you can't afford $130 for a 4-barrel intake manifold, you can't afford to build your engine, because I'm going to spend more than that just on bolts for the engine, right? head bolts, main bolts, you know, rod bolts, all that stuff. By the time I buy those, that's going to be more than the intake manifold. That's just the cost of doing the engine, right? So anyways, what I can do is build one of them 2-barrel carburetors and put on there with the stock cam and the stock manifolds and see what we get. Then I also have a set of shorties headers I can put on there and some long tube headers that I can put on there as well. So I'm going to see if I can squeeze that testing in. I don't know if I can do a chassis dyno for all that because that costs money. And yeah, it costs money to do that. It's not cheap. Got to get the truck down there to do the pulls and everything. But what I can do is do 0 to 60 runs, and I can do 1/8 mile runs. I do have an 1/8 mile track, which would be cheaper than going to the dyno. And what do we get doing the 1/8 mile track? That might be something that I can do as well. No promises on that, but I can do 0 to 60s. And like break out the phone with Track Addict and do 0 to 60 runs, time those, and see if we even see a difference. Because if I don't see a difference on a 0 to 60 or an 1/8 mile run, I'm definitely not going to send it to the dyno, right? That wouldn't make sense. It's going to have to be a significant difference. But it could be one of those things. Hey, we start out with the stock cam and the 2-barrel carburetor, and then a final build with a 4-barrel carburetor, and I do want to use the factory intake manifold. I do have one of those, not for a 318. We'll get into that when we go over intake manifolds. So I do want to do that with a set of long tube headers and that like 218 at 50 cam. More info on that coming up during the build. So that's kind of the overview of what I'm looking at doing on this engine, the targets, and everything like that, what the build plan is. And it's very important to have a build plan before you start something like this. And of course, things go crazy because the heads I have might be completely cracked and I can't use them. I let that kind of stuff happens, and then, okay, now our build plan has to change. But anyways, that's initially the build plan.